Welcome to the Value Creating Human, a conversation series where we share the stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary value creating things in our communities and around the world. We hope to inspire in you a desire to explore what it means to be human and how you can create value in your lives and the lives of others. As humans, what kind of values are worth pursuing? What values can we create in our community? Let's explore together in the upcoming episodes. Today, our guest is Dr. Maria Guajardo, esteemed educator and international speaker who champions inclusive opportunities for diverse communities. Dr. Maria Guajardo is a professor of leadership studies at Soka University, Japan, where she previously served as dean and vice president with the distinction of being the first female and the first non-Japanese in these positions. Her research is at the intersection of leadership, global citizenship, DEIB, which stands for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, women, and critical pedagogy. She recently published 2 book chapters, Global Citizenship Education and Humanism, A Process of Becoming and Knowing, and The Space in Between. And her previous journey was featured in Over, Under, Around, and Through, How Hall of Famers Surmount Obstacles. She is currently co-editing her book, Value Creating Education, Teachers' Perception and Practices. She's a graduate of Harvard University, receiving her Ph.D. from the University of Denver. She's also the recipient of the University of Denver Alumni Lifetime Achievement Award, as well as the Soka University Award of Highest Honors. Dr. Guajardo, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
So let's start off with some personal questions for the podcast. So for anyone who doesn't know you yet, we would like to understand what made you decide to devote a very large portion of your life towards a career in education, and also the various social causes that you have been championing.
Thank you for that question. I think it's important to start with the beginning, and my beginning is my family background. So I'm the daughter of Mexican immigrants. My parents came from the Mexican state of San Luis Potosí, and they crossed the border with 3 children in tow and had 3 more in the United States. And I was one of those 3 that was born in the US. So I was born and raised in the US, but my parents had no formal education. Both of my parents had never been to school. My mother, well, she went until 2nd grade, but neither one of them knew how to read or write. So imagine neither one of them had ever read a book. And I was determined that their sacrifice to come to a new country, to invest in their children, that sacrifice would emerge as my own educational career. And so creating access to education, because education really was the gateway to opportunity. And so that's where my journey began.
Thank you very much. And knowing that you've achieved so much, based on your strong determination to be a pillar for your family, really, and to be someone who inspires, I'm sure there must be numerous difficulties as well. How have you been able to overcome some of those stigmas and discrimination in your life journey pertaining to your leadership capabilities, specifically, you as a representative of women of color and the Latinx community?
Well, certainly born and raised in the United States, at a very young age, I understood that I was not white. And that's an important distinction to make, to realize that you're the other. So there's always this desire to be like the majority. And what I have discovered over time was that if I had my North Star, if I knew what mattered to me, what direction was I headed in? There's a saying that says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And that's the opposite of having a North Star. So for me, having that North Star, that sense of purpose and mission that was based both on life experiences, it was based on my life philosophy. I'm a practitioner of Nichiren Buddhism, so that also created this alignment between my purpose and my actual adventures, if you will. So how did I remain on my path? I'd say it was a contribution of both my intention, purpose, and also my life philosophy.
Thank you. So now we're on the mental well-being general questions. how has obtaining an academic background in clinical psychology, which for our audience who do not know, Dr. Guajardo has obtained a master's and also a PhD in clinical psychology. How has having this degree actually assisted you in your careers?
Initially, I had no idea what a psychologist was. As a daughter of immigrant parents, I probably needed a psychologist, but never knew that. But what I discovered was that by looking around me and seeing other people's life's journeys, I knew that growing up could be made easier. I grew up poor. I grew up with very little educational support. My parents couldn't help me with homework, and we know how important it is to have that sense of family support, and yet there were some very practical things that could not be provided. I wanted to make growing up easier for others that perhaps were poor, immigrants, brown skin, not English fluent. That's what I wanted to do. And it was almost by default that I fell into this path of psychology. I discovered that knowing about others and having a desire to want to contribute to the life of others was, in fact, psychology. Now, my interest wasn't individual work. Although I am trained as a psychologist, I'm also trained as a researcher. My interest was to take this new set of skills, of competencies, and take them to a community, take them large scale. I wanted to be able to transform my community, the communities that I became a part of. And so psychology allowed me to do that. Psychology trained me, both as a researcher and as a clinician. And I think, much to my benefit now, and by design, I have taken those skills and competencies and applied them in arenas that perhaps were not familiar with this approach. So I apply these concepts of healing and community in the classroom. I apply it in groups. I apply it in trainings and facilitations that I do. So I don't see it as this sterile approach to well-being. I see it as a very humanistic, very loving way to create wholeness and community.
Thank you. So you mentioned humanistic. We'll go into maybe a bit more about what humanism means, for people who are very unfamiliar with that terminology. But before that, what are some of the challenges that you had faced in managing the mental well-being of the students that you had taught? And, it doesn't have to be your student, it could be other people in your life experiences. And how have you managed to overcome these challenges with them?
I'm very aware that the young people who I have had the great fortune and benefit to meet are of a different generation. They're all digital natives. And it's the exact opposite of me. I mean, you're looking at someone and speaking with someone who wrote their master's and dissertation on a typewriter. I mean, this is, my students say, oh my gosh, you didn't have Google to do your research with? I said, no, right? It was a long time ago. But what I wanted to share is that the experiences that my students go through are very unique and singular to them as a group. There are new ways of connecting, new ways of interfacing with each other that are very different than what was experienced 2-3 generations ago. And so I have found that this has become even more complicated as a result of the pandemic. The pandemic absolutely twisted and churned the experiences of young people. What would have been social distancing became physical distancing. Individuals couldn't, at one of the most important times of life, young people could not be in proximity with one another and develop relationships in ways that allow you to make mistakes and to stand up and to discover. All of a sudden, because of the pandemic, young people had to figure out how to do this online or alone, or in absence even of physical contact. And so, unfortunately, students have had many challenges when it's come to gaining a sense of themselves, gaining a sense of being in community with others, in relationship with others. And so it's very real. That's what I would say. This is very real. It's distress, it's tension, it's a fabric that has been ripped. And my job is to be able to begin to weave that fabric alongside my students.
I wish more people reweave fabrics with each other. From your perspective, what can youth individually do? Well, since we can't change the reality of isolation and being pulled away from your community, what do you think youth can do to overcome, their sense of stigma, discrimination with their own mental well-being in their local context?
I'm a firm believer that it's human contact. When a baby is first born, they say that that golden moment, that critical moment for the future of this new life is the physical contact of that baby next to his or her mother's body. And so I think that we now, as young adults and as older adults, we need to replicate this idea of human contact, of human relationships, of human proximity. So what can we do? We can perhaps step away from the devices and the new ways of being that distance us from one another. What if we actually talk to one another? What if we extended ourselves and became better friends? So what advice would I give? I'd say, become a great friend. And honestly, your iPhone or your iPad cannot do that. It cannot do that. For as much as we believe in the benefits of technology, at the end of the day, it's very simple. How can you become a better human being and allow others to also enrich your life? I think it's that simple.
Yeah, so for reference to the following question, because Dr. Guajardo is actually based in Japan and the United States for most part of her career, and it's very rare to have you in Singapore. Just for sharing some statistics for the following question, Singapore's local suicide prevention service, SOS, Samaritans of Singapore, issued an annual report last year, noting that suicide rates had risen nearly 26% in more than 2 decades. From 378 individuals who committed suicide in the year 2021, 2022 marks the highest number at 476 individuals. The release also notes the following: suicide has, quote, remained the leading cause of death for youths aged 10 to 29 years old for the 4th consecutive year, unquote, accounting for 33.6% of all deaths within the age group. Knowing these concerning statistics, we would like to understand if you have any thoughts on what educators and caregivers can do to become more equipped in tackling this global issue of mental well-being in youth.
I think it's important to recognize that when young people take their lives, and these statistics that you've just shared are absolutely alarming, that it's not unique to Singapore. In Japan, during this time of the pandemic, between the years of 2019 and 2023, I just read, suicide rates increased 50%.
Oh, wow.
For young people, during the pandemic, for young people between the ages of 19 and 24. 50% increase in suicide. In the United States, Latino adolescents have the highest suicide rate, at least in the state of Colorado, where I practiced for 30 years. So this is very real. And I think what I would suggest and offer to those that work with young people is to not minimize it, to not diminish it, and to not try to push it away. I think for as challenging as it is, I think we have to come to terms with the angst and the anguish that young people are experiencing. It's important to begin there. I think it's also important to recognize that when a young person is struggling emotionally at this level, no other task is important. School will not be important. Academic achievements will not be important. Job hunting will not be important. So I think it's a realignment of priorities. And the life of our young people has to be the first priority. So we have to be able to see, and I put that word in quotes, but we have to be able to actually see the young person in front of us, not as a statistic, not as an outcome, not as a percentage rate, but as an individual who has amazing talents and strengths that perhaps remain hidden at the moment, hidden to them and hidden to us. So our job is to become that explorer that allows the young person in front of us to discover what it is and who it is that they are.
Yeah, to follow on that question, you mentioned, to not prioritize academics and, potentially like material things or looking for a job. What do you think you could advise? And you also mentioned about humanism. So I would like to kind of pair up these two into one question, which is, how do you think humanism can help to kind of transform the prioritization away from what is traditionally what we know growing up to be what we should be focusing on? Because when people like us don't feel like we could achieve that, that is where the slender or the kind of depression comes in, because we're not attaining what is expected of us.
I think that it's important to put into context how we have evolved over the last, say, 3, 4, 5 decades. We have come out of, Singapore included as a country, has come out of very strong economic growth. And because of that, that context shaped the expectations that we have for the younger generation. We want to be in this very neoliberal world, economically strong. Capitalism is not a bad thing. It's a sign of growth and success. So what I'm asking is, can we reevaluate that measure of success? Can we take a step back and recognize we can't ask our young people to run if they're having trouble even walking? And I mean that figuratively, not literally. So how can we support and assist? Yes, parents will often say to me, but I want my son or daughter to have a great job and I need them to do well academically. I understand that. And yet what I know is that if that young person feels broken, these other goals may be achieved, but that young person's heart and well-being will not be intact. And if we really want to support this new generation, the children that are in line already growing up, if we in fact are serious, we have to be attentive to them as whole human beings. And that to me means it's not mutually exclusive of success as you now know it. But in fact, it begins to lay a foundation so that when that young person achieves that success, it is not at the expense of their emotional health.
Thank you very much. So the reason that this episode is made possible in person is actually because Dr. Guajardo is being invited to Singapore for a workshop series hosted by Dear Dignified Being, a community initiative that advocates for inclusivity through dialogue. This series themed Exploring the Power of Good and Cultivating Power for Good is kindly venue sponsored by NAFA, Nanyang Academic of Fine Arts, and UAS, University of the Arts, Singapore. So for our audience who may be curious to know, what is the underlying motivation for this event?
I love gathering individuals and asking them to unlearn, relearn, and learn anew concepts. Concepts such as power, concepts such as leadership, concepts such as well-being. And the reason this is so important to me is because I believe that part of my presence on this planet is to be able to move at warp speed. The incredible human beings that I have an opportunity to be around. And one way to do that is to begin to reposition what we understand about power. Power and the political is woven into every aspect of our life. And I believe that if we can unlearn and relearn what this concept or the concept of leadership, if we can personalize these concepts and understand that power is a process, leadership is a process, it's a relationship, it is done in company with others. I think this will be good work to be able to do. I do it in Japan. I hope to do it here in Singapore.
Thank you. So what can youths and adults do to become contributing agents for the power for good?
I think it's learning how to find our voice and speaking our truth. I believe it's working at being a better human being in a very comprehensive way, learning how to extend ourselves to one another, because happiness cannot come at the expense of someone else. Peace cannot come at the expense of someone else. So how we become better human beings? I'm not the first one to say this. There are many scholars, many mentors of mine who have shared these words. And I'm just standing on their shoulders now, hoping to advance the same ideas.
Thank you. So for our parting question, what is one quality that you think every value-creating human should have?
Today, I would say love. I would say love. I believe that, that's even another concept we have to unlearn and relearn. Because for me, love is the capacity to extend yourself, your best self, to others. And if we can do that work, I think we'll be paving new pathways for ourselves and for those that are yet to come.
Thank you for tuning in. This episode of The Value Creating Human was brought to you by Be Human, a Singapore-based social enterprise that looks to co-create peace-building through dialogue within our region and around the globe. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a like, share, and subscribe in our social media handles. We hope to see you for our next exploration.